Since the very beginning of time, humans have accepted the idea of a flattened stationary Earth enclosed in a spherical dome. This idea was accepted all throughout the world by many cultures. It is also the oldest conception of our cosmos known to man. All ancient cultures subscribe to a flat Earth cosmography. The flat Earth model is said to be an archaic conception of Earth's shape as a plane. The word archaic translates to very old or old-fashioned, also meaning no longer in everyday use, or in this case, it's no longer being taught in today's educational systems. In ancient Egyptian mythology, the god of earth is called Geb, and he was often found lying on a flat ground beneath his mother Nut. In the ancient Hebrew conception of the universe, the ancient Israelites divided the world into heaven, earth, sea, and the underworld. They viewed the sky as a vault resting on foundations. The world was viewed as a disk floating on waters secured by pillars. Even the ancient Islamic conception of the cosmos shows the earth as a flat plane enclosed in a sky canopy. In fact, today, the Muslims build their mosques this very way. And many other cultures had cosmologies that were identical to these, such as the ancient Norse, the ancient Hindu, the ancient Mayan, the ancient Incan, the ancient Navajo, and even the ancient Kushite, which is known as Ethiopia, as well as the ancient Masonic cosmos, shows the arch and square plane. Now I know the question many of you may be asking, how did we get the cosmology that we have today? Many of you, just like me, can remember when we were in school. In history class, we were taught many great things that the ancients had accomplished. We were taught about many great temples and many great technological feats that the ancients accomplished. We give them credit and reverence for so many great things today. But the one thing that we were taught to mock and laugh at was the ancient idea of a flat earth enclosed in a spherical dome. We weren't taught much about this conception of the cosmos because they was too busy indoctrinating us with the globe. How did we arrive at this point? How did the entire earth go from this ancient conception of the cosmos to the popular models that so many of us readily accept today? This video will answer that question and so many more. I'm going to go over a timeline of the heliocentric theory, which came after the geocentric theory. So in 300 BC, Greek philosophers Plato and Aristotle models geocentric theory with Earth as a sphere. Aristotle publishes in his book On the Heavens. Keep in mind that there's no historical proof of the real existence of a Plato and Aristotle, and many believe today that they were fictitious names that was used to forge history under. We see that the book On the Heavens was published in 300 BC, and it was Aristotle's chief cosmological treatise written in 350 BC. It contains his astronomical theory and his ideas on the concrete workings of the terrestrial world. According to Aristotle, in On the Heavens, the heavenly bodies are the most perfect realities whose motions are ruled by principles other than those of bodies in the sublunary sphere. So in Aristotelian physics and Greek astronomy, the sublunary sphere is the region of the geocentric cosmos below the moon, consisting of the four classical elements, earth, water, air, and fire. So here in front of you is an example of the Aristotle/Ptolemaic universe. Ptolemy played a key role in bringing heliocentrism and Hellenism into Egypt and introducing this concept to the people of those lands, along with the Bible and Christian concepts as well. If you look at this Aristotle/Ptolemaic universe, you can see in the direct center would be the earth, and above it would be what's called by the ancients the 7 wandering stars. Today we call them the planets, but Earth is really the only planet. And when you do the etymology of planet, you see that it simply means a plane enclosed in a net or a nut. Just like I showed previously, this is the oldest conception of the cosmos. And the first change of that concept was the model you see in front of you now. And the only significant change was that the Earth was now balled up as a ball, but it was still in the center of the universe. Before this change, there was no known recorded ends to the Earth. And there are so many lands that you can reach before you even make it to the dome, according to a lot of ancients. But the first change to that model, again, is what you see in front of you. And basically what Aristotle and Ptolemy did, along with Plato. And basically what Plato, Aristotle, and Ptolemy did in this model was ball the Earth up into a sphere. And they got rid of the archdome concept. So now the concept of us living on the surface of a ball came to be, and the concept of space, which separated us from the source of the creation, now came to be with this model here. But it doesn't stop quite yet. This is a geocentric model, meaning that the Earth is at the center, but it still doesn't mean it's flat. So that was a long journey to us leading up to the cosmology that we know today. And it starts right here with the model in front of you. And as you can see, again, the Earth in the center, and above it, the 7 wandering stars. We know that 7 is a very symbolic number, symbolizing completion. There are 7 days of a week. There are 7 continents, supposedly. There are 7 chakras. And if you want to know more about the significance of the number 7, especially in relation to the cosmology, I did do a video entitled The 7 Wandering Stars that you can find a link to in the description area. And it's a very interesting video that'll go even deeper into the concept of the 7 wandering stars. So now that we got an idea of how Plato, Aristotle, and even Ptolemy conceived the cosmos in their time, we can hop back over to our timeline. So this was in 300 BC, and this is the geocentric theory under Plato and Aristotle. And we move on to 200 BC. The Greek Aristarchus of Samos placed Earth and other planets in motion around the central sun, but this was rejected by the Aristotelians. So here in 200 BC, we see that Aristarchus actually proposed the modern concept that we have today of Earth and other planets going around a central sun, but it was rejected then. So we move up to 140 CE, and Claudius Ptolemy of Alexandria devised a complex system of quote-unquote epicycles to account for retrograde, going backwards motion of the planets, published his theory in a book called Almagest. In 200 CE, Ptolemaic system was developed by Claudius Ptolemaeus, the Almagest, and it was the geocentric theory. And in 1270, the Roman Catholic Church adopts priest Thomas Aquinas' theory of a God-ordained and man-made centered universe, which declared the glory of God. So far as we backtrack, we see that this guy Aristarchus, around the time of 310 to 230 BC, was an ancient Greek astronomer who presented the first known model that placed the sun at the center of the known universe, with the Earth revolving around it. And that would be the solar system that many of us learned about when we were children. And it was a simple stationary sun-centered system with the planets going around it, sort of like a hypnotization spiral. So Aristarchus was influenced by Philolaus of Croton, but Aristarchus identified the central fire with the sun, and he put the other planets in their correct order of distance around the sun. Like Anaxagoras before him, he suspected that the stars were just other bodies like the sun, albeit further away from Earth. He was also the first one to deduce the rotation of Earth on its axis. His astronomical ideas were often rejected in favor of the geocentric theories of Aristotle and Ptolemy. Nicholas Copernicus attributed the heliocentric theory to Aristarchus. So one thing I want to point out in relation to everything we just went over is that the time we're in now, when we're talking Aristotle, Plato, Ptolemaic universe here, we're talking the Hellenistic period. And this was still kind of the era of Alexander, the Ptolemies, the time of the fall of Egypt. What we want to keep in mind is what went along with the fall of Egypt was that the Egyptians not only lost their native deities, but they also were given foreign deities and foreign cosmologies. Anytime a people is given a new deity, they are automatically given a new cosmology with that deity, because all gods reign from heaven, and different people had different conceptions of heaven based on their cosmology. So this is why the Bible has its own cosmology. So when the Ptolemies and Alexanders and the likes came and invaded Egypt during this Hellenistic period, remember that all of the cosmologies were linked to religion, and science and religion were one, even in the ancient world when they were flat earthers. It wasn't till this change, or what we call geocentrism, Plato and Aristotle's universe, which was enforced by Ptolemy, it wasn't until this change in this Hellenistic era that the concept of an enclosed earth didn't exist. So we also went over the fact that around 200 CE, Claudius Ptolemaeus developed his geocentric theory system in a publishing entitled Almagest or Almagest. And this was a 2nd century Greek language mathematical and astronomical treatise on the apparent motions of the stars and planetary paths, again written by Claudius Ptolemy. It was said by some to be the most influential scientific text of its time. Its geocentric model was accepted for more than 1,200 years from its origin in Hellenistic Alexandria in the medieval Byzantine and Islamic worlds, and in Western Europe through the Middle Ages and early Renaissance until Copernicus. So the Almagest is the critical source of information on ancient Greek astronomy. It has also been valuable to students of mathematics because it documents the ancient Greek mathematician Hipparchus' work, which has been lost. Hipparchus wrote about trigonometry, but because his works appear to have been lost, mathematicians used Ptolemy's book as their source for Hipparchus' work in ancient Greek trigonometry in general. Ptolemy set up a public inscription at Canopus, Egypt in 147 or 148. N.T. Hamilton found that the version of Ptolemy's model set out in the Canopic inscription was earlier than the version of the Almagest. So again, we also read that in 1270, the Roman Catholic Church adopted the priest Thomas Aquinas' theory of a God-ordained and man-centered universe, which declared the glory of God. So I think it's very important to keep in mind that around the time they was getting rid of the ancient concept of the flat earth cosmology and replacing it with geocentrism, there was a lot of indoctrination and slavery taking place. But again, as we read in 1270, Thomas Aquinas' theory of a God-centered universe was adopted by the Catholic Church. And this was right after the geocentrism era, for lack of better words. Right after this, in 1453, the Gutenberg printing press was developed. I think we need to pay attention to the timeline because before all of this, the earth was a flat plane in the center of the cosmos. The first major change was removing the archdome, or removing the covenant or the covering, and balling the earth up and creating space in between the people and the Most High. And after they reached this step, the next step was Thomas Aquinas' theory of a God-centered universe. So we know that most of us who are awakened, that Jesus is just a personification of the sun, and we're dealing with astrotheology. But here we can see the history of it all, because at this time they had replaced the earth with the sun, and now the sun was the center of the cosmos. Because at this time they were getting ready to start altering this model a bit more. As we read on, you will see where we go from geocentrism, where you have the earth as a ball and space is now created, the covering is removed. You still have your 7 wandering stars, but the next step would be to change the earth into one of those wandering stars, and we call those planets today, and remove it from the center of the cosmos and replace it with the sun dominating the entire system. That would be the next step that we're going to get into here shortly. And this was created by sun-worshipping Freemasons and heliocentrists and elite men, for lack of better words. But we see the timeline here that when they was altering the cosmology, they were also developing concepts of a sun-centered universe. So if you fast forward time up until today, you can see that today's science has the sun at the center of the universe, and every religious text has the sun at the center of the entire storyline. So we know in Christianity, Jesus is the Son of God. He wears the halo because he's really just a personification of the actual sun. I tell my Christian friends all the time, and I don't mean any harm when I say this, but we can argue whether or not Jesus is the Son of God, but we can walk outside every day and literally see the Son of the Creator. That one would be a fact that none of us could argue with, but I digress. My point is that Jesus is a personification of the Son, which is at the center of the modern heliocentric universe today. And we see the history of that coming forth by the Roman Catholic Church and Thomas Aquinas around 1270. And we move on up into 1453 when Gutenberg developed the printing press and Bibles were mass produced. And I think the first Bible was the Septuagint Bible, because 7, again, is dealing with the number of completion. Again, there were 7 wandering stars that everyone knew about, and they tracked time with this system during that time. So when you look at the first Bibles, they was just calendars or numerology books, all surrounding the numerology of 7. 7, Sabbath. So the 7th day of the week was always known to be Saturday. Or if you look at this Ptolemaic universe, this geocentric depiction, you can see that the 7th wandering star on this model is Saturn. Now we know the earth isn't a ball, but the 7 wandering stars were always in this order, but the earth was enclosed. And the earth was depicted as a plane, but the 7th wandering star was Saturn. So Saturn, or Saturday, is the Sabbath day. The number 7 translates to Septos. And this is how we get the month of September, which should have been the 7th month. But of course, the calendars were being altered during this time as well to change this cosmology to the modern concept that we have today. So that was a journey. A lot of Kemetic people accept today's model, but our ancient Kemetic ancestors did not accept today's model because they didn't even have months like July and August that would be necessary to go along with the accepted model. What we all must keep in mind is, as I told you in the very beginning, in 300 BC was the time of Plato and Aristotle's geocentric theory. But what you also must keep in mind is that 300 BC, what was going on in Egypt, it was the year of the pre-Julian Roman calendar. At the time, it was known as the year of the consulship of Corvus and Pansa. The denomination 300 BC for this year has been used since the early medieval period when the Anno Domini calendar era became the prevalent method in Europe for naming years. BCE is the abbreviation for before the common, current, or Christian era, and that's just an alternative to before Christ because all cultures don't acknowledge Christ. Also, Anno Domini translates to year of our Lord, and the reason they call this the year of their Lord because this was the year when they conquered Egypt under their lords and their cosmology. They even have a movie called 300 dealing with this event. The earliest form of geocentrism, as I said earlier, has us enclosed in an archdome on a stationary earth plane. And the next form of geocentrism would be the Aristotle and Plato model under Ptolemy. But one thing we want to keep in mind is geocentrism simply means earth-centered cosmology. It doesn't necessarily mean the shape of the earth being flat or round. It just means the earth at the center. So as we move on, we'll see how we move up until today, where we're being told that the sun is at the center of the universe. Remember that Saturday is the Sabbath, and on a geocentric model, you have 7 wandering stars, with Saturday being the last one. Today, we are told that Sunday is the Sabbath. So there's clearly some things off track with the time we are in today. And we all know that the months July and August were added. Keep in mind the concept of the 7 wandering stars and the earth-centered geocentric model. And think about fields of study such as geometry, which I deal with geometry a lot on this channel. So just explore it. And when we talk sacred geometry or geometry period, again, we're talking earth-centered studies. And also keep in mind that the word earth means heart, because earth is at the center, according to the ancients. I've proven in so many videos, as well as many other flat earthers, that the earth is just the way the ancients conceived it. I just want to continue the historical timeline and the history of geocentrism leading up to heliocentrism on this particular video. So let's continue. So again, in 1453, Gutenberg developed the printing press after all of these different models and theories were being presented. And after that, in 1543, Nicholas Copernicus came aboard and publishes on the revolution of heavenly spheres. Because Gutenberg had developed that printing press, then Nicholas comes along and publishes on the revolution of heavenly spheres in his last year of his life, which postulates a heliocentric, sun-centered solar system where Earth and planets are revolving around the sun. So this was Nicholas Copernicus, who now came along after the printing press and after Thomas Aquinas had already come with his theory of a God-centered universe. And prior to that, we see the coming out of ancient cosmology into the geocentric models, which took the dome away and balled the earth up and created space. We lead all the way up to 1543. Nicholas Copernicus, in the last year of his life, postulates a heliocentric, sun-centered solar system where Earth and planets are now revolving around the sun. For who would place this lamp of a very beautiful temple in another or better place than this, wherefrom it can illuminate everything at the same time? This was a quote by Nicholas Copernicus, worshiping the sun. Again, this sun-centered model took away the balance, but the balance was taken away the moment Aristotle and Plato created the first model. But I'm just showing you how over time it slowly and surely became what we have today. This Nicholas Copernicus model was the model that many of us was taught in school, but our children today are learning a figure 8 model, in which we'll get into that as well. But we're going to work our way up the timeline. So we're here in 1543. We see Nicholas Copernicus now come with the sun-centered solar system. And in 1580, Tycho Brahe, a Danish astronomer, claimed the most accurate measurement of planets and stars, yet still was uncertain of a heliocentric or geocentric model, was first to suggest a non-circular orbit of planets. So now we're leading out of the hypnotization spiral style solar system into a more dynamic version where the different planets are in their own circular orbits in different angles. The picture in front of you shows an example of the differences of the two. So over time, they had to develop the math and develop the theories and the lies to make these non-scientific models work. Keeping in mind that for many, many years, when we talk flat earth cosmology, people were finding their way around this earth just fine. They were navigating the seas by the stars, and they were all using Polaris or the North Star to find their way home. This wouldn't have been possible on a globe to look up and navigate by the North Star no matter where you are on the plane. It's because you're on a plane, and because the ancients did this, they knew that they were on a plane. But we can see here now how the deception took place over time. So we move on from 1580, and they go from all of the planets going around a stationary sun in circular orbits, into now each planet having a circular orbit, but in a different trajectory, a different angle. So it's slowly changing. And in 1582, the Gregorian calendar replaces the Julian calendar by Roman Catholic Church Pope Gregory. We move on to 1609, and Galileo grinds his own glass and makes a telescope, observes Venus' moons going around Venus, and this is so-called proving heliocentrism. So far, what we're reading is how heliocentrism come to be. But what we're not reading is where any scientific experiments took place to prove or disprove these models. It was pure speculation and theory, and this is what we're reading. You can do your own research, prove me wrong. This was during the time of Hellenism or heliocentrism, what we're calling heliocentrism, what we're still in today. We're in hell. Or helios. So we're supposed to take Galileo's word as so-called proof of heliocentrism. In 1609, Galileo also publishes his work in Italian so all laymen can read instead of scholar Roman Latin. We move on to 1619, and Johannes Kepler, a German astronomer, student of Tycho Brahe, so-called proved the heliocentric theory by identifying planet orbits as elliptical and not circular. Again, they're still tweaking the movement of the planets because now they've switched the Earth with the sun. You see it work perfectly in the ancient geocentric model. But when we moved on to Aristotle and Plato's model, from then on, they've been changing it and changing it and changing it because they just can never get it right because it's not the truth. We move on from Johannes Kepler and we move on up to 1687, and Sir Isaac Newton, English astronomer and president of the Royal Society of England, stated that the quote-unquote law of universal gravitation, which mathematically showed the force that kept the Earth and planets going around the sun, as well as what kept the oceans in and air from flying away. He also wrote the book quote-unquote Principia Mathematica. Around this time, Isaac Newton was coming up with the theory of gravity. So we're talking about a science that we ended up with today that's based on theory. Remember that the root word of theory is theos, which means God. These are men who exalted the sun as God so that they can personify the sun as a man of worship. Sun worship is the worship of the man. As above, so below. It's the worship of the sun, the S-U-N, as well as the worship of the sun, the S-O-N. So Jesus, being the Most High and the light of the world, was another personification of the sun, to have everyone caught up into this Hellenistic system. Remember that Thomas Aquinas had already came with the theory of a God-centered universe in the year 1270, and the Roman Catholic Church adopted it. So after that, it was all about coming up with the theoretical dialogue to make all of this stuff make sense in order to indoctrinate us with it. And there was a lot of men that played a part in that. You can see they went from the basic hypnotization spiral style to someone saying, okay, let's change the elliptical orbits. And Johannes Kepler and Tycho Brahe had a role in that. Sir Isaac Newton come with the theory of gravity to make this thing make sense. And after that, in 1758, Edmund Halley successfully predicted, using Newton equations, the return of a comet that was last seen. And this is just them reprogramming the masses during this time, because remember that the ancients were making successful predictions with their flat earth systems for many, many years. But nevertheless, as we move on, in 1822, the Congregation of the Holy Office removed heliocentric books from the Vatican banned book list. And in 1838, Friedrich Bessel measures quote-unquote stellar parallax method to measure first distance of a star, 61 Cygni. And again, this is now the kind of theoretical science where now you have to believe the scientists, as opposed to the ancient system where we all were the scientists. And we had schools that proved to us the true nature of our cosmology. So now we're in a time of the theoretical scientists, which are no different than the pastors. It's all theology and theory based. So we move on to 1915, and another theoretical scientist by the name of Albert Einstein published the general theory of relativity, in which gravity is not a force, but it is a consequence of the curvature of space-time. Okay. And we see just theories built upon theories and no facts. But it was all an attempt to take us away from the ancient truth, which is a fact, a provable fact. None of what we've read so far is factual based. It's all theory based. You have to keep that in mind. Science isn't nothing you believe in. Science is a verb. It's a method. So if the only action you take is believing a so-called scientist, that's not science, that's indoctrination. You have to do your own experiments and research, and you will get the same results many of us flat earthers got. And that's that the ground you walking on is flat, and that the ancients were right. So the idea of a flat plane domed by a firmament was common in quote-unquote pre-scientific societies. So anything associated with the era when everyone on Earth had this conception of a flat Earth cosmology, they teach us to call it pre-scientific today. When you go and research pre-dynastic time, or the time before dynasties ruled over man, you will see that the people were more in tune with nature. But somewhere along the way, we were able to be deceived. And I'm just giving you the history of that deception. So the idea of a spherical earth appeared in Greek philosophy, also with Pythagoras around 6th century BC. Again, Aristotle played a great role in providing so-called evidence for the spherical shape of the earth by around 330 BC. And knowledge of the spherical earth gradually began to spread beyond the Hellenistic world from then on. From as far back as man has records into the age of enlightenment, science and philosophy taught the earth was the center of the universe, with the exception of Aristarchus in 310 to 230 BC, who was said to be the first to propose a sun-centered universe, as we went over. And Plato and Aristotle in 300 BC postulated that the earth was a sphere, but still a geocentric earth-centered universe. And I went over that earlier, how they removed the covenant or the arch dome in science and balled the earth up and created space in between man and the Most High. Claudius Ptolemy in 85 to 165 AD of Alexandria devised a complex system of quote-unquote epicycles to account for planets that appeared to go backward or in retrograde. The Bible taught that the earth had four corners and was flat, a plane. Thomas Aquinas, as the Roman Catholic Church was coming to power, stated famously the heavens were God-ordained and man-centered. And that's how we get thrusted into today's man's world, because you have to remember that the ancient flat earth conceptions are also matriarchal concepts. Nicholas Copernicus, a priest at the University of Bologna, realized that the rising and setting of the sun, moon, and stars could be accounted for by a daily revolution of the earth. Also, he found that if he put the sun at the center of the planet's orbits, he could simplify the number of epicycles from 80 in Ptolemy's system to a mere 34. Although epicycles do not exist, Copernicus was the first to quote-unquote prove that the Earth and all planets rotated around a stable sun, not Earth. His idea that the Earth and planets orbited about the sun became known as the heliocentric theory. He wrote about it in his book, De Revolutionibus, which translates to Concerning the Revolutions. So again, to my Kemetic people, I'm giving you the history of the globe and of heliocentrism, and it has no origin in Africa or anywhere else. I've already given you the origins of those ancient lands. A lot of those old cultures are still geocentric to this day. And the Dogon are geocentrists, in which I proved in many previous videos and will be doing also in the future. So stay tuned. So we read more about Copernicus. For his contemporaries, the ideas presented by Copernicus were not markedly easier to use than the geocentric theory and did not produce more accurate predictions of planetary positions. Copernicus was aware of this and could not present any observational proof, relying instead on arguments about what would be a more complete and elegant system. And that's how we end up today. When I present facts to globalists, they do what we were conditioned to do, which is laugh. If you go inside of a bar and tell somebody you don't believe in a deity, that you're an atheist, or you don't have any belief in the Most High, they won't look at you strange. They will say, okay, you just don't believe in, a higher power. But if you tell that person that the earth is flat, they will laugh at you until they're red in the face, because we've been conditioned and indoctrinated to do this by sun-worshiping heliocentrists. And as you can see here, Copernicus could never prove any of his nonsense. He relied on arguments, and his arguments would be centered around which one looked the best, which one is the most elegant system, nothing scientific. And this is the same concepts that I get confronted with by a lot of globalists. I've even heard globalists say, hey, bro, Sanchez, I'm a globalist because what debunks the flat earth is the fact that my woman got curves, and I like curves. But if you look at the flat earth conception, it's enclosed in a sphere or a curve or a dome, but we're walking on a plane. So it's the binary code 0 and 1, or the arch and the bow, masculine and feminine. But in the current heliocentric model, there's no room for the feminine, because the earth is a blue speck dominated by a huge sun. But when we look up at our sky, we notice the sun and moon be the same size above our head, making a circuit above the earth, just as the ancients portrayed them in their conception. We don't experience our reality the way it's predicted in the heliocentric model. And just a little research will easily debunk it. Only thing that heliocentrists will rely on is exactly what we read. Arguments of which one is more elegant, not science. So as we move on and we recap on Tycho Brahe, he was a Danish astronomer who made measurements of the planets and stars. I don't know how he did it, but his measurements were the most accurate, they said, that had yet been made. Tycho proposed a system in which all of the planets except for Earth orbited about the sun. He claimed that the sun still orbited about the Earth. As an astronomer, Tycho worked to combine what he saw as the geometrical benefits of the Copernican system with the philosophical benefits of the Ptolemaic system into his own model of the universe, the Tychonic system. Furthermore, he was the last of the major naked eye astronomers working without telescopes for his observations. So the Tychonic system or Tychonian system is a model of the solar system published again by Mr. Brahe in the late 16th century, which combines what he saw as the mathematical benefits of the Copernican system with the philosophical and physical benefits of the Ptolemaic system. I'm just going over this so that you can see how the deception came throughout our timeline leading up to today. So Brahe proposed the model of the solar system to explain Galileo's observation. This was an explanation, people. This is theory, explanation, not factual. This was to explain Galileo's observation that Venus has phases without making it necessary for Earth to be moving. His model had all the planets except Earth orbiting around the sun, but then the sun orbited around the Earth. You see the model in front of you, study it and make your own postulations. So after disagreements with the new Danish king Christian IV in 1597, Tycho Brahe was invited by the Bohemian king and Holy Roman Emperor Rudolf II to Prague, where he became the official imperial astronomer. He built the new observatory at Benátky nad Jezerou. There, from 1600 until his death in 1601, he was assisted by Johannes Kepler, who later used Tycho's astronomical data to develop his 3 laws of planetary motion, working without telescopes for his observations. I don't know how this was possible without telescopes. But nevertheless, we read on in summarization that Tycho was the first to suggest a non-circular orbit for a celestial body, a comet. He used calibrated and bigger instruments, new techniques to measure angles, similar to a sextant. He built an observatory and made accurate and continuous measurements for 20 years, supposedly. His measurements helped to prove that planets orbited the sun, supposedly. But what you got to keep in mind is that he built an observatory, but remember, there was no telescopes yet. If there was no telescopes yet, what was this observatory? A window similar to a bedroom window? What could this observatory really observe if there was no telescopes? He also was said to produce an accurate map of the stars with 777 stars with no telescope again. And he measured the length of the year to within 1 second, supposedly. But he was still unable to choose between a geocentric and heliocentric model. He had his own model with the Earth at the center, orbited by the sun and the moon, with planets orbiting the sun. Never worked out the mathematical details, and his model was never accepted. Tycho's observations of stellar and planetary positions were noteworthy both for their accuracy and quantity. His celestial positions were much more accurate than those of any predecessor or contemporary. Interestingly, before the breakthrough by Galileo of direct observation, the Roman Catholic Church, led by Pope Gregory, adopted the solar calendar in 1582. So this was around a time, again, when they were creating all the theories to make this heliocentric model make sense. And remember that the church had already adopted it earlier. I think that was under Aquinas. And here you see that Pope Gregory adopted the solar calendar in 1582. That's the calendar that we're still under today, and that many like myself believe ended on September 23rd, 2017. And you can watch my videos about that significant date. I really recommend those. They're in the description. But the big question we need to ask a lot of these quote-unquote Kemetic scholars is, did our ancient ancestors who had the flat earth cosmology, did they also have Pope Gregory's solar calendar? If you say no, then there's no way to prove, for example, that cosmologies such as Nut and Geb are also synonymous with modern cosmology, with sun-centered concepts that we are plagued with today. There are no similarities, and the real question is, why so much deception? Stay tuned, and I'll be getting into the why. But right now, let's get into the how and the when, as we've been doing. So let's continue. The Gregorian calendar, also called the Western calendar and the Christian calendar, is internationally the most widely used civil calendar. That's the calendar that we are indoctrinated with today, that many of your quote-unquote Kemetic scholars are indoctrinated with today. I've debated so many so-called Kemetic scholars on whether or not the earth is flat or round. And in every debate, none of them show up with Nut and Geb. None of them show up with pictures of the ancient cosmology. The reason they never show up with these depictions is because they are hiding the truth, and many of them, in my opinion, are gate guards. And I'll be making many videos about that deception as well. I will be taking us from the history that we're going over now all the way up into the time that we're in today. And you will see there's a long history of programming and everyone playing a role in the programming. So in most debates, my opponent tend to make mockery instead of use science, just like we read earlier, because this is how globalists have been taught to argue the globe. This was a cosmological concept created by egotistical sun worshippers to exalt the man above every species on earth. We're in a society of male worship. Most quote-unquote Kemetic scholars that I debate, they never show the ancient concepts that they said that they revere so much. They argue in defense of the Western models and the heliocentric models that were given to the slaves. And they have no idea of our ancient ancestors' true cosmological concepts because they've been taught to mock them. So therefore, when they show up for debates, they leave those depictions at home so they don't look like hypocrites. And most of them show up with a little disc floating inside of space. And that was given to them by government groups like the Flat Earth Society. But that is not what flat earthers accept or teach nor quote unquote believe in. True flat earthers have no concept of space. Remember, space was created by Plato and Aristotle and Ptolemy. We went over that. So now we're just going to move on. So the Gregorian calendar was a refinement in 1582 to the Julian calendar, amounting to a 0.002% correction in the length of the year. Take a minute and think about that. The Gregorian reform contained two parts: a reform of the Julian calendar as used prior to Pope Gregory's time, and a reform of the lunar cycle used by the Catholic Church with the Julian calendar to calculate the date of Easter. The reform was a modification of a proposal made by Aloysius Lilius. So Aloysius Lilius was an Italian doctor, astronomer, philosopher, and chronologist, and also the quote-unquote primary author who provided the proposal that after modifications became the basis of the Gregorian calendar reform of 1582. So he provided the proposal that became the basis of the Gregorian calendar reform of 1582. His proposal included reducing the number of leap years in 4 centuries from 100 to 97 by making 3 out of 4 centurial years common instead of leap years. Lilius also produced an original and practical scheme for adjusting the apex of the moon when calculating the annual date of Easter, solving a long-standing obstacle to calendar reform. The Gregorian reform modified the Julian calendar scheme of leap years as follows. Every year that is exactly divisible by 4 is a leap year, except for years that are exactly divisible by 100. But these centurial years are leap years if they are exactly divisible by 400. For example, the years 1700, 1800, and 1900 are not leap years, but the year 2000 is. In addition to the change in the mean length of the calendar year from 365.25 days to 365.2425 days, and this is a change from 365 days and 6 hours to 365 days and 5 hours and roughly 49 minutes. And it's a reduction of 10 minutes and 48 seconds per year. The Gregorian calendar reform also dealt with the accumulated difference between these lengths. How the Gregorian calendar was able to rectify such minuscule timing of the Earth rotation before telescopes, and why they used the sun-centered method when modern history tells us that they supported an Earth-centered universe, is unclear and undefined and needs to be researched further. Though the implications of the new science were not worked out immediately, it began to be suspected that if the theories were true, man had lost his birthright as the creature for whose sake all else existed, and had been reduced to the position of a puny and local spectator of infinite forces, unresponsive to his wishes and unmindful of his purpose. In the same era, Galileo saw a crude magnifying-looking glass at a circus coming through town and got the idea to make a telescope. He learned to grind his own glass and made the first telescope to peer into the heavens. He used the newly invented telescope to make his own observations. He studied mountains and craters on the Earth's moons, the phases of Venus and the moons of Jupiter. Particularly, he noted that Venus at times appears to be a crescent, just as the Earth's moon does. All of these findings supported Copernicus's heliocentric theory. But when you think about these are theories upon theories that other theoretical men are supporting with their theories. And at the end of the day, we have to either believe these guys or not believe them. And science was never a matter of belief until now. Before this, science was always a matter of fact. In 1610, Galileo observed that Venus has a full set of phases like the phases of the moon. It was contradictory to geocentric model, where Venus should not have full light from the perspective of the Earth. Actually, Venus phases are a result of the orbit of Venus around the Sun inside of Earth orbit. So here we see he was incorrect in his theory. In the same year, Galileo observed with his telescope 4 objects moving near Jupiter. After analyzing data of their full period of moving, he concluded that actually these 4 objects are orbiting Jupiter as moons. This was unacceptable by the geocentric model, where all celestial bodies should just orbit around a stationary Earth. Galileo's significance of what he saw, number 1, cast doubt on a view of the quote-unquote perfection of the heavens of Aristotle and Plato. Number 2, showed deficiencies of the geocentric Ptolemaic model. Number 3, rotation of sunspots around sun suggested that if the sun could rotate, perhaps the Earth could too. Number 4, phases of Venus would be a natural consequence of the heliocentric model. Number 5, Jupiter's moon showed that centers of motion other than Earth existed. Galileo wrote about his observations and thus angered the Roman Catholic Church. The church eventually placed him under house arrest. The Inquisition was tribunal of the Roman Catholic Church at this time. The Inquisition made Galileo kneel before them and confess that the heliocentric theory was false. So we move on to Johannes Kepler around 1571 to 1630. And Johannes was a German astronomer. Kepler was invited to live in Prague by Tycho Brahe. Tycho died a year after Kepler's arrival. Kepler inherited a wealth of astronomical data from Tycho. In 1594, Kepler accepted an appointment as professor of mathematics at the Protestant seminary in Graz. He was also appointed district mathematician and calendar maker. Kepler used this data to draw conclusions about the orbits of the planets. He primarily was interested in 2 questions. Why are there only 6 planets? And how are their orbital periods related to their distance from the sun? After trying many geometric curves and solids in Copernicus's heliocentric model to match earlier observations of planetary positions, Kepler found that the model would match the observed planetary positions if the sun is placed at the one focus of elliptical planetary orbits. This is Kepler's first law of planetary motion. Kepler's 3 laws of planetary motion allow accurate matches and predictions of planetary positions. Kepler hypothesized that a physical force moved the planets and that the force diminished with distance. Planets closer to the sun feel a stronger force and move faster. The concept of a physical force was a monumental step. Kepler was on the verge of assigning physical causes to celestial motions. Kepler later determined that the orbits were not circular but elliptical. And so we move on to around 1642 up until 1727, and Sir Isaac Newton, who is widely recognized as one of the most influential scientists of all time and as a key figure in the scientific revolution. His book, Philosophiae Naturalis Principia Mathematica, which means the mathematical principles of natural philosophy, was first published in 1687, and it laid the foundations for classical mechanics. In 1666, Newton observed that the spectrum of colors exiting a prism in the position of minimum deviation is oblong, even when the light ray entering the prism is circular, which is to say the prism refracts different colors by different angles. This led him to conclude that color is a property intrinsic to light, a point which had been debated in prior years. He also showed that colored light does not change its properties by separating out a colored beam and shining it on various objects. Newton noted that regardless of whether it was reflected, scattered, or transmitted, it remained the same color. Thus, he observed that color is the result of objects interacting with already colored light rather than objects generating the color themselves. This is known as Newton's theory of color. Newton moved to London to take up the post of Warden of the Royal Mint in 1696, a position that he had obtained through the patronage of Charles Montagu, then Chancellor of the first Earl of Halifax. He took charge of England's great recoining, somewhat treading on the toes of Lord Lucas, governor of the Tower. Newton became perhaps the best-known master of the mint upon the death of Thomas Neal in 1699, a position Newton held for the last 30 years of his life. These appointments were intended as sinecures, but Newton took them seriously, retiring from his Cambridge duties in 1701 and exercising his power to reform the currency and punish clippers and counterfeiters. As warden and afterwards master of the Royal Mint, Newton estimated that 20% of the coins taken in during the Great Recoinage of 1696 were counterfeit. Counterfeiting was high treason, punishable by the felons being hanged, drawn, and quartered. Newton was made president of the Royal Society in 1703 and an associate of the French Academy des Sciences. In his position at the Royal Society, Newton made an enemy of John Flamsteed, the Astronomer Royal, by prematurely publishing Flamsteed's Historia Coelestis Britannica, which Newton had used in his studies. In April 1705, Queen Anne knighted Newton during a royal visit to Trinity College, Cambridge. Newton was the second scientist to be knighted after Sir Francis Bacon. Newton was one of many people who lost heavily when the South Sea Company collapsed. Their most significant trade was slaves. Newton died in his sleep in London on the 20th of March 1727 and was buried in Westminster Abbey. The mathematician Joseph Louis Lagrange often said that Newton was the greatest genius who ever lived, and once added that Newton was also, quote-unquote, the most fortunate, for we cannot find more than once a system of the world to establish. So we move on up to Newton's law of gravity and motion. Newton derived the law of gravitation between two masses. Since the sun was the most massive object in the planetary system, all of the planets would naturally be attracted to it and revolve around it in the same manner as the moon revolves around the earth. Based on Galileo's and Kepler's works, Newton published Principia in 1687. In this book, Newton posed the theory of gravity, in which the force that makes planets to move around the sun is the same force that makes objects fall onto the earth, which is the force of gravity. Remember, gravity is a theory. Theos equals God. If you go back to the earliest cosmology on earth, it was the most stable, the most factual, most truthful. And one thing about the ancients is they always had a place in this cosmos for the Most High. And that place is where all compasses still point to this day, brothers and sisters. And the ancients said that what makes everything move was the source, the creator of this awesome creation. We make the mistake of excluding the creator from science because we've been taught by heliocentrists that the ultimate scientists have no place when it comes to studying nature. We're taught to exclude the creator when we study the creation, and when we do this, none of the secrets of this place will be revealed to us. We've been taught to exalt the theories of man above the wonders of nature, which teaches us the nature of the Most High every day. And we've ignored this for so many years. We've accepted indoctrination. We've accepted theories and drawn out concepts that are so far from our true reality. And here we are today in a world of CGI pictures and more programming and more deception based on theories and belief, deceptive images and fakery. So in Newton's theory, he deduced gravity as a force of mutual interaction of body with mass, and this force is inversely proportional to the square of the distance between objects. The heliocentric model was established by Newton, but there was some question about the gravity. For example, its action at a distance and its immediate action. Even Newton had doubts about the gravity action at a distance. How can massive objects attract each other at a distance without mediation of anything? And how can attraction force between them be immediate without a time to act? Newton eventually wrote about gravitation and the heliocentric theory in Principia Mathematica in 1687 at the prompting of another famous astronomer, Edmund Halley. Halley used Newton's equations to predict that a comet seen in 1682 would return in 1758. The return of Halley's comet was supposed to give final proof to the heliocentric theory and is now known as Halley's Comet today. But if you actually think about Halley's Comet, it never struck Earth. It streaks across the sky. Now, I know many of you are going to have questions about comets and all of that, so I have a thorough video on that. Just check it out. The link is in the video description. When you think about comets and things that we're able to predict for hundreds and hundreds of years, and they're still being predicted today, it kind of debunks the modern heliocentric theory, especially if you want to say that parallax changes. We see the same sky that the ancients saw, and we're still predicting these quote-unquote comets. That debunks the chaotic heliocentric model. So final quote-unquote proof according to the heliocentric theory for the solar system came in 1838 when F.W. Bessel determined the first firm trigonometric parallax for the two stars of 61 Cygni. Their parallax ellipses were consistent with orbital motion of Earth around the Sun. Bessel was a German astronomer mathematician. He was the first astronomer who determined reliable values for the distance from the Sun to another star by the method of parallax. Although he left school at the age of 14, he was appointed in January 1810 as director of the Königsberg Observatory by King Frederick William III of Prussia. Bessel won the gold medal of the Royal Astronomical Society in 1829 and 1841. In 1915, Albert Einstein published the general theory of relativity, in which gravity is not a force, but it is a consequence of the curvature of space-time. Thus, massive body creates a curve in the space-time, then inertial trajectory that with straight lines become curved. These inertial trajectories are called geodesics. An object can inertial follow a geodesic without an interaction of forces. As consequence, heavy objects create a quote-unquote big curvature on space-time that makes other objects fall towards them by a geodesic. If an object has extremely big mass, even the light will suffer a noticeable deflection. This object is called a black hole. Einstein's master insight was that the constant familiar pull of the Earth's gravitational field is fundamentally the same as these fictitious forces. The apparent magnitude of the fictitious forces always appears to be proportional to the mass of any object on which they act. By analogy, Einstein proposed that an object in a gravitational field should feel a gravitational force proportional to its mass as embodied in Newton's law of gravity. We move on up to 1958, and President Dwight Eisenhower established the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, known as NASA. Former SS Nazi Werner Magnus Maximilian Freiherr von Braun led NASA's Rocketeers. Von Braun was already the central figure in the Nazis' rocket development program, responsible for the design and realization of the V-2 rocket during World War II. He was said to be directly responsible for the kill of prisoners by hanging at the rocket facility he commanded during the war, as well as the death of tens of thousands in England and France from Nazi V-1 and V-2 rockets. After the war, he and selected members of his rocket team were taken to the United States as part of the secret Operation Paperclip. Braun worked on the United States Army's intermediate range ballistic missile program before his group was assimilated by NASA. Under NASA, he served as director of the newly formed Marshall Space Flight Center and as the chief architect of the Saturn V launch vehicle, the super booster that propelled the Apollo spacecraft to the moon, supposedly. According to one NASA source, he is, quote-unquote, without doubt, the greatest rocket scientist in history. In 1975, he received the National Medal of Science. Additionally, C. Fred Kleineck, head of NASA at the time of the Apollo space program, is now the sovereign grand commander of the Council of the 33rd degree of the ancient and accepted Scottish rite of Freemasonry of the Southern jurisdiction. In 1992, the Roman Catholic Church finally repealed the ruling of the Inquisition against Galileo. The church gave a pardon to Galileo and admitted that the heliocentric theory was correct. This pardon came 350 years after Galileo's death. So now you all have some type of foundation of how heliocentrism came to be. There was a long period of theoretical scientists crafting this system of indoctrination that we're under today. And the programming is so deeply embedded into our psyche. And the only arguments that they have against the ancient flat earth facts are all elegant, egotistical arguments that are not rooted in science. I want you to think about everything that we went over today. And remember how heliocentrism was born from geocentrism, and how we go from an entire earth of flat earth cultures who were all on the same page at one time to the popular heliocentric models that rule the world today. So the current model of today is this figure 8 model. And they're showing us this figure 8 model with the earth as a globe and all of the planets making all of these crazy patterns around the sun at these ridiculous speeds through this void. Yet we still see the same perfection in the sky as the ancients saw. And we all still look up at the North Star and we're able to navigate by it no matter where we are on earth. Proving earth is a plane just as the ancients conceived it, just as we experience it. What you believe today is indoctrination that goes against what you actually experience in your reality. The root word of reality is real. The root word of believe is lie, because beliefs are based on theory and what's real is based on science and facts. This video is just an introduction because I know I have many new subscribers, and it's very important that you know the history of heliocentrism. Science was never based upon theory until we entered the time of Aristotle and Plato. In the 4th century BC, the two influential Greek philosophers, Plato and his student Aristotle. So we see that when they begin to theorize and speculate and change the ancient conception of earth, then they had to create explanation after explanation, theory after theory to explain all of the mistakes in the model, because the model isn't based on reality. And today we see that it's so easily to be debunked when you start questioning it, because it's a system of indoctrination that depended on you not questioning it. Remember that there were some things you were given before you were able to question. Religion was one of those things, and the globe was another. And they both have something in common, that they're theoretical and based on beliefs of men and not the truth of nature. I want Kemetic people to understand that the Ptolemies didn't just come to Egypt with Bibles. They came with globular concepts to take away the ancient African concepts of an enclosed earth. And this was the whole concept of man breaking the covenant, changing the cosmology. And chaos came after this. And we're still in hell today, which is Helios, chaos, because as above, so below. If we think the creator above us placed us in a chaotic universe that was theorized by these evil men, then we really agree in our hearts that this is the evil nature, chaotic nature, imperfect nature of the creator, if we accept this ideology of the creation. Remember that we only know the creator by the creation. So be careful what you believe. Beliefs are to be proven or disproven, but they are not intended to be the end result of anything. And when we based entire systems on theories and beliefs, we end up in a world of confusion and chaos like we are today. And there are a few men who are able to rule out of that chaos. Stay tuned. I'm going to be taking us further in the timeline And I'm going to be showing you how even when we move up into the hip-hop culture and what we call the black conscious communities, how the programming of heliocentrism further re-indoctrinated us in our generation through certain hip-hop groups, through certain school of thoughts. And I'm going to show you how a few men hid the true nature of our cosmos to keep the masses ignorant. Like this video, share it in Facebook groups on your Twitter wall. Subscribe to Bro Sanchez TV, Flat Power TV, and Bro Sanchez Live. Make sure you hit the notification bell on each channel. I have so much great work for you guys. I try my best to upload a video every Thursday, but every now and then I miss that day. But you can expect the video every Thursday. We passed 47,000 subscribers, and I just want to say much love to you all. New uploads every Thursday. Peace and much love.